Um, well, funny.
That was terrifying.
At some point, and your little penguins are so funny.
Emmons just fades into black. Just can't handle this. Too much pressure.
Woodman.
Yes.
Okay, so I get the feds, but I forget. I would appreciate a short summary of both of them. The Federalist Papers. That would be good.
So which ones?
Well, it's Fed 70 for the executive, and then Fed 78 for the judiciary, right?
Yes. So Fed 70, the easiest way to think about it is the energetic executive, right? Like,
right.
So Hamilton basically constantly is making this argument that we need have you ever heard of the term "the buck stops here"?
No.
Okay, I'm old and a history teacher. Don't worry about me. So it was a Harry Truman quote. So he's talking about it when I can't remember what somebody was asking him about, but the idea that like when you are the president, it is at the end of the day, it should be your fault if something goes wrong, right? Like the country should look at you if things hit the fan. And I think that is kind of the perception that Hamilton had on the executive, right? So he wants somebody who can act quickly, decisively when the country needs it most. And in addition, because of that, like you should be looking for somebody who is willing to take the blame when things go wrong. That's why you don't want two executives. That's why you don't want, and that's kind of what he says later in the essay. And so if you have an energetic executive, they can act when you need them to act. When your country's at war, when this whole like Ukrainian Russian war begins, like you don't want somebody incompetent in office, because this is you're literally dealing with nuclear proliferation. Like you're dealing with what could eventually like, so when you're thinking about that, Fed 70, Hamilton would be like, listen, this is exactly why I said what I said. I want somebody who can act quickly and decisively. And whether that's through putting restraints on Russia, like on boycotts and what's the word I'm looking for? Sanctions. That's great. Or if it's literally sending troops, like that should be at the end of the day on, or not sending troops. Like that idea that like people have been like, oh, we should support Ukraine even further. Biden is realizing that maybe that's not the best idea as far as America is concerned, and that we can provide better support through monetary and material support, right? Like we're going to send you a bunch of Javelin missiles because you don't need you guys have fingers, like you can figure that part out. But you guys don't have the missiles. So, that's the idea of Fed 70s, that idea that like energetic executive, there should only be one, that person should be relatively powerful. And that person should have the ability to sort of operate in that position. Fed 78, just keep in mind that like, it's not going to get brought up a lot, if at all. But for the most part, like it could come up in an FRQ, it could come up randomly because it is in the book. But I think for the most part, all you need to know about Fed 78 is the idea that like really the judiciary, and it's kind of funny because I think the College Board likes to use it like tongue in cheek to some extent. Because does anybody remember what Hamilton says about how strong that branch is?
It's weak.
Yeah, like this is the softest branch of government. And so I think that anybody who has read the Citizens United decision would say otherwise. Like this is not the weakest branch of government. So you could always juxtapose it with like judicial activism, right? Like Fed 78 doesn't really stand up when you have a concept called judicial activism, because that means that the judicial branch, can do more than we originally anticipated it doing. But that was kind of like Hamilton's argument for the Supreme Court, and in it he does make mention of the ability to go through and decide if something is constitutional or not. So judicial review kind of comes up in Fed 78 as well. And so those are the two Federalist papers within this unit that you could potentially deal with. Fed 70 is probably more important. Fed 78 would probably be a little less as far as priorities are concerned.
How important is how important is 51 for the checks and balances thing for this unit?
I think actually kind of important. Not to give anything away, but I would certainly understand Fed 51. I think that it could lead to you performing a bit better on maybe one of the essay questions. And Fed 10 and Fed 51 are always going to be the two that like rear their ugly heads, right? Just because they're foundational, like they're truly about the interworkings of the government. And Fed 51 being more important because, like, think about the entire unit, right? Why, Owen, do you think Fed 51 would matter here most?
Because this is like, we're talking about the branches and the idea like checks and balances between them, and 51 is about checks and balances.
Yep. So that's if I mean, I doubt, like, I don't think Fed 10 really comes up here. It doesn't make any sense to apply Fed 10 to this unit. I mean, I guess you could if you wanted to talk about Congress and the formation of like factions. But that doesn't, I mean, that would kind of be a reach, I think. So you could probably do it effectively.
I still don't understand what pork barrel spending is. I think you did this like during the days that I wasn't here after break. So I just have no like examples or like basis on that.
Okay. So while you were living in train stations,
Yeah.
so pork barrel is like a really interesting concept, but basically the idea of pork barrel spending is that like Congress can weave like spending into bills to get something to pass. So whenever you hear about somebody like complaining that Congress wrote this bill which was supposed to be on something mundane like fixing roads, right? Like something like, oh, we're going to name this post office or something super mundane, but in there you see like, oh, but we're going to include spending like to fix bridges in southern states or something along those lines, right? What they're trying to do there is sort of fit in this like fat, right? This fat spending. And so pork barrel really is just referring to the pieces of legislation that are kind of slid into bills that have nothing to do with like what the bill's actually about. But the idea behind it is to basically gain consensus to pass a bill that might not be popular with, let's say, Republicans. And so you're passing this bill in an attempt to do something that matters. And the Republicans are like, we don't want to pass that bill. And so you throw some pork barrel pieces into the legislation, and suddenly they're going to want to like support it because they have, oh, we're going to donate or we're going to give money to some Southern organization that needs help. And I can find some like more specific examples of that if you really need. But the general idea is like you're weaving this in. And there's a number of the metaphor to me, like with pork barrel, I'm sure there's an actual like metaphor to it, but like if you've ever had anything with like, if you've ever had, and you haven't, maybe you did when you were younger, but this may not work for you. But like a burger, but in the burger, you put a little pork fat and it is delicious, right? Thanks for that, Owen. And so like that's what I think about. I think about like, oh, how do I get this person to find this bill palatable, right? The bill is boring to them. And so what I do is I put a little pork fat in that bill, and the next thing you know, they're gobbling it up, and they're like, oh, I got to sign this bill because of the pork fat. Like, they supported a cause I liked.
Okay, that's a lot simpler than I thought it was. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we're talking about like merit-based civil service and like the Pendleton Act, is that like the modern use? Like, do people now use that in the modern context? And is like the political patronage like back in the day?
So this is really difficult, right? Because like without I think that we're still a merit-based system, right? For the most part. I think that there are arguments that like, hey, wait, like why does this person hold this position can come into play. And I think that was maybe a little more you could maybe make that argument 2 or 3 years ago. You know, when you saw like Ivanka, like as part of, she was an unpaid, but like why did she have the position she had? You know, why did people within that family have the position they had? So like, I'm not saying the spoils system is dead, because I think it still is around to some extent, and I'm sure every president to some extent has used it. But I think the spoils positions are like less important, right? Like they're not, there's no longer like, oh, I'm gonna have my buddy be the Secretary of State. Like, say what you will about Hillary Clinton, like she was pretty she had enough experience to be like the Secretary of State when she got appointed to be the Secretary of State, right? Like you know, and so there is somewhat like, to an extent, what have you done for me lately? But normally it is still paired with like, are you qualified for the position, right? So it's less so like back in the day they just hire their buddies. You just bring on, like, I'm thinking primarily like Andrew Jackson, right? You pissed him off, it was over. He brought on somebody who like just would do what he wanted, but who he could just talk to. And specifically, if you haven't, I mean, if you've taken AP Gov or AP US, I know Sarah has. There's this great moment in US history called the Petticoat Affair. And basically, like, Andrew Jackson didn't like the way this one, like, I think she was even just like somebody's girlfriend, like, so she was like dating somebody, and he really didn't like the way that she was treated. And so he just like removed people from the cabinet because of that, and just put him in with his cronies, like just replaced him with people he could trust. And so like that's the spoils system. So the Pendleton Act sort of went beyond that, and sort of said like, listen, the bureaucracy is huge and massively important. So we can't have like, I can't have like my Uncle Tom, you know, who lives in Michigan, be one of the head meteorologists for NOAA. Like that doesn't make sense. I need to have somebody who's qualified for that position, who can read the data, who can tell me when storms are coming, etc. So in that sense, like Pendleton did change the way we look at how we appoint people in the bureaucracy. And so I think in that sense, it's still like, we can still kind of see touches of the spoils system, but I still think most of the people who have been appointed because they're like buddies with somebody are still pretty qualified to be in that position. And also, it's one of those things where like we only see like in the news, like the way the news sort of broadcasts it to you. Those are the things they make the biggest whoop about. And so I think that when you have millions of people employed by the bureaucracy, that most of them are there because they're competent at their job. And that was one of the biggest things, like when people talked about the transition from Obama to Trump, is that that idea, and even from Trump to Biden, like there are still people who have served the government for like 20 years, who are still in their positions, who haven't been fired because, oh, well, they were appointed under a Democrat, so when a Republican takes office, they have to be removed. Like those things happen less now than they used to. And I think that's the idea behind the Pendleton Act, is like government is so big and so important that we kind of, and they handle so many important things that we can't like switch the doctors at you know, the veterans, the VA, because like they voted for a guy in a blue tie instead of a red tie. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that helps.
How did they actually make it so that it wasn't merit-based anymore? Like, did they just say, hey, don't replace people? How'd they do that in a law?
So how did they go from like spoils system to Pendleton? Like, is that the question? Or how have modern politicians been like, hey, this is, you're now this position, and I know that you're not totally qualified, but you're mostly qualified, therefore this.
How'd they go from spoils to Pendleton?
I honestly, if I'm remembering correctly, and I might not be, I may have to check this out, but I'm pretty sure it involved the assassination of a sitting president. I think it might have been McKinley. I'm just Googling it really quick. No, nope, that's something that's not helpful at all. The Garfield. Okay, so Garfield was assassinated by somebody who wanted a job but didn't get it. So the Pendleton Act basically came after a sitting president got murked because somebody didn't get a job.
That, yes, I agree with that. I agree with
I
that.
don't remember that in the reading.
That's just
no,
it was
fair.
not in the read. Was it really?
No, it wasn't. Absolutely no way. Mm-mm.
I'm pretty sure this is just me having like, you know, lived my life and taken AP US and been interested in history for so long, that just kind of was somewhere in the back of my head. So you don't have to know it, Bella. Like that's unimportant for you to know. I think Owen just asked a question outside of the restraints of what I would normally answer as far as like things that are going to be on the test.
Thanks.
I'm not gonna.
Hey, what? I was just curious. What?
Yeah, no, you asked a really good question. I answered it. It's not going to be on the test.
We don't need to stroke his ego anymore.
Don't call his questions.
It's on recording, Kathy.
Yeah, good.
Oh no, this is recorded. Oh, no.
Fair enough. All right, additional questions.
I do have a question.
Absolutely.
It's another thing along the lines of pork barrel spending. Actually, not at all, but log rolling. That's just like people saying, "I'll pass your bill if you pass mine," and like that sort of like trading votes in that way. Or am I like reading that wrong?
No, I think that seems about right for log rolling, and the vocab term there. Let's look at the exact definition. That way, again, I don't screw this up. There is a sport called log rolling, which involves two competitors, and each one of them is on the end of a free floating.
Yeah.
So I think that's exactly what the book is talking about specifically, is that idea that there's two lumberjacks on one log. I'm pretty sure that's exactly.
I will write that in my FAQ4.
Please do. You're exactly right. Like,
Are you guys joking?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And so it is when, sorry, sarcasm isn't always passed through this so well. But yeah, so you pass mine, I pass yours, and we'll just keep the log rolling.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Indiana Jones moment.
Huh.
I watched a movie last night.
Shut up.
It was like Red Notice or something like that, and just randomly there were suddenly like Nazi treasure, and I was like, wow, this is a serious Indiana Jones movie. But I did not anticipate random Nazi treasure. I will say that. More questions.
I have a question on like the incumbency advantage, like
Okay.
versus the House. So is the House has like a higher incumbency advantage, right? Because they represent the districts and not the state.
There's that, and then in addition to that, how long do they serve?
2 years.
Right. So like when you serve 2 years, you're thinking of like it's just in the front of your brain, like, oh, I voted for this person last time. Like, and so they tend to receive even, which is really weird because that's not the intended consequence is that if you suck, you get removed. And that's the idea of the 2-year term. Instead, it's led to something different, which is like this incumbency effect, which means that like if you're in the House and you win the election, unless you royally screw up, chances are you're probably going to get reelected. and so with the Senate, when you're serving 6-year terms, like that tends to be a little less important. But I think the incumbency advantage is still pretty well alive in the Senate too. We as Americans are kind of hilarious in that we're like, it's never our senator, it's never our representative who's screwed up. It's always somebody else's guy, right? Like our guy is great and their guy sucks. And so there's that piece too, which is weird. But yeah, I mean, once you get in office, it's easier to stay in office than it is to just win an election outright as a new candidate. But in the House, it's a little easier because your name is constantly in the media. And part of the reason that is right, 2-year terms. And so that 2-year term, you're basically like, that's the wild thing about the House of Representatives is that like, you're basically constantly campaigning. Like, you're constantly out in the public eye. And so you're trying to be noticed. And so the incumbency advantage, even though it applies to basically any elected official, does apply a little more to the House of Representatives.
Are we gonna need to know like the process of like bill to a law? Because like I can study it and memorize it, but like if there's a shortened or like a summary, that would be great if you could give that like a simpler version because there's a lot of steps.
What page is it? Does anybody have their Abernathy book in front of them?
Definitely not. I'm doing laundry.
Kathy.
There. So there's a page and I can see it. It's on the left side of your book. It's on the left page. And so on that page, there is a flow chart on how a bill becomes a law. And I think that is the easiest thing to look at. Because I think it does a pretty good job of giving you, okay, this is how it happens. And then you kind of fill in the blanks. I don't think that's going to be massively important.
Okay, sweet.
But understanding like, okay, like if you were ever asked a question about like Senate versus House and what are the differences between how like, I think that's more so how like you could see it on the AP test. They may hit you with like what are the like how did the founding fathers, how did they structure these two houses and how does it come to play in like seeing a law created? And so there you would just kind of talk about like, yeah, well, they both have subcommittees and they're both important. However, there's like a rules committee for the House of Representatives, and the rules committee is in existence because when you have 435 members, it's much harder to debate a topic than it is if you have 100. And because the Senate only has 100 and they're supposed to be more qualified for the position, they serve 6-year terms. They're supposed to be older, wiser. Then you kind of go from there and sort of say like, well, that's why they get the idea of, a filibuster. And that's why they can pass through a cloture and those kind of things. You may want to remember that like the House of Representatives is where all tax bills start because the House of Representatives is supposed to be the closest connection to the people. But I think outside of that, I don't think that you're gonna like conference committees, stuff like that could come up in like there's some questions about that. In addition to that, like tying into the bureaucracy to some extent, right? Because what can Congress do to sort of check the bureaucracy at times? Does anybody remember?
Can't they can dissolve like different.
Yep.
I'm blanking on the word. They
Like
can dissolve
agencies?
things. Things can be dissolved.
Yeah, they can dissolve agencies. What else can they do?
Oversight hearings?
Oh, exactly, like oversight hearings. And so when that stuff kind of comes in and you're looking at Congress, that might be something that you have to remember to some
But
extent.
what can they like if they do like an oversight hearing? They can't really do anything, right? They just like hear it and like the Supreme Court notices it and the public notices it, but it's not like they can act on it. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it could lead to the disillusionment, like, right, or it could lead to action because you're right, like you're bringing it to media attention. If somebody's super ineffective, or if like, I don't know if that's how like the Teapot Dome scandal kind of came to bear when like they were selling off, when the Department of the Interior was selling off like public lands at like the like Secretary of the Interior himself was like getting his pockets lined to sell off public lands. Like if that kind of stuff would come out in those hearings and then they can act and have like those people removed from office and such. that could be true. But would those normally end up happening that way? Probably not. Like, I don't think that would be the normal oversight. Like, oversight just keeps the bureaucracy in the public eye and kind of keeps the interaction. So the bureaucracy is actually a thing and a part of government that is under control, I guess, or like being checked.
Okay, and the president like can remove and appoint heads, right? Like that's kind of their main checking, and like, well, like they decide the structure, so they can also dissolve branches question or agencies question mark.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. Let me look. I think so, through executive order. But I would definitely have to, if it permits the president to divide, consolidate, abolish, or create agencies, that's the Presidential Reorganization Authority. So yes, they can actually remove or create agencies. Oh, Space Force. Friggin', I should have known that. Space Force was created under Trump. And I think through like an executive order. Like, it wasn't just so yeah, if they can create it, they can destroy it to some extent.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
This might be just me blanking and like getting into test mode and I'm forgetting silly little things, but in the Constitution, does it ever explicitly like say or like grant the president the power of like executive orders?
Absolutely does not.
Okay.
Absolutely not in the Constitution.
Okay.
Which is a really interesting piece and probably something that should be, we didn't really talk much about that, but no, like I think we might have brought it up to some extent, but like, yeah, that's the history of the presidential order or the executive order is not something that is directly in the Constitution, which is really an interesting piece. But they basically said, oh, he's a chief executive, therefore he should be able to execute certain laws on his own.
Okay.
I will share quickly with you, not that you have to read it, but I'll put it up on Classroom as a comment on the Zoom link, a Constitution Center article about executive orders, if you are curious.
Is there any like case ruling that like, I don't know, like set the precedent for the president's ability to do executive orders? Like, could I source that in any way? I don't know. Is that just like a thing that most people agreed on is like part of their role?
I think it's the latter. And so that like a president can be checked. And so like there have been numerous cases where the Supreme Court has been like, get out of here. Like, that's not constitutional. You know, and that I think back to like the most glaring example. I mean, obviously, we've been seeing some stuff in your executive order essay when you or your executive powers essay. When you looked at that, like there's that piece, and they were talking about like different aspects of the Biden law, and so Biden of the Biden mandate, and so like they'll look at that and say like, oh, it's illegal for Biden to sort of put it in like hospitals, but it's not constitutional for like Biden to put it into like Kmart or like private companies. And so like there are those conversations as well, where like, and something more clear would be, I think the easier one is thinking back to the Trump presidency, and thinking about like the immigration ban, like that came out. And he was like, well, we're not gonna, from the quote unquote S-hole countries that came out in like a news leak or whatever, a leak from his office. But he like labeled them. Here are the countries we're not accepting immigrants from, whether it was like Syria, Afghanistan, like we're specifically not taking you, which is massively discriminatory and totally unconstitutional. You can limit immigration, but you can't like outright say, sorry, Nigeria, we don't need any of your princes over here. That's unconstitutional. So,
Okay.
so I'm thinking of those moments.
Cool.
For when the president decides to like send troops into war.
Yep. Did I cut out or did you cut out or what's going on here?
Internet connection is unstable because I live in the oldest house in America and I don't have good Wi-Fi.
Oh, fair enough.
Basically, when the president sends like troops to a foreign country, just off to war, as long as he notifies Congress within the 48-hour period, is he allowed to keep those troops over there till what, like 30, 60, or 90-day period?
I think it's 60 day and then Congress can or he can apply for like another 30 days or something along those lines. I want to check quickly what exactly, because there is, I mean, what policy, do you guys remember what policy it was that, or what act went in after Vietnam? What was that called?
War powers.
Yes, the War Powers Resolution, right? And so, okay, so troops must be withdrawn after 60 days, and then 30-day extension if necessary for safe removal. So you can do up to 90 days technically with the War Powers Act without congressional authorization.
Okay, perfect.
So basically there are three, and technically, okay, so here are the three ways that a president can only introduce armed forces into conflict, likely conflict, if one of the following conditions is present. Congress declares war, Congress authorizes action, the US or its territories are attacked. So you can move troops for 48 hours. Or you can move troops into conflict. You have 48 hours to tell Congress. Congress then would make why they were introduced. You have to explain the quote unquote estimated scope and duration of said conflict, and then go from there with Congress. So it's kind of interesting. But for the most part, the US or US territories or potentially NATO territories need to be attacked in order for that to work.
So can the president not just like say, hey, I'm sending these troops to like such and such Timbuktu without like merit or reason?
No, they can't. And that was because that's kind of what happened during Vietnam. Whether it was in either LBJ or Nixon, you can look at either guy. Nixon decided that he was going to start bombing, flame throwing Cambodia, and you had LBJ get the Gulf of Tonkin resolution passed, which basically just gave him a blank check. Like, you can do whatever you need to win the war in Vietnam and to stop those dirty commies. And from there, like, do whatever you need to do. So that was kind of why that went into play in 1973, after kind of as Vietnam was teetering out. Oh, I should have been putting eek. I'll have to go back through and listen.
Will you review like presidential roles?
Sure. And there are really some ones that you should know that are more important than others. But for the most part, you have so they're technically, it's very interesting. Your book only identifies 5. There are technically 7. And so that is but first and foremost, they're the chief executive. That's Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States. And that's when they take the oath of office. So from there, their job is to appoint. That's why they have control over the bureaucracy, is because they are the chief executive. And so that's where they appoint ambassadors and cabinet members, etc. That's where the executive orders come in play. They are also the chief diplomat. So he is the person who she is the person who interacts with ambassadors and appoints them. They are the person who brings those people like important, figures, whether it was, right now, obviously, I'm sure Biden's talking to all of the leaders of NATO, discussing things with Zelensky, and I'm sure has tried to reach out to Putin as well. And so you have that piece. We just saw it. You guys some of you probably watched it, some of you probably didn't. It is painful to watch, but the State of the Union, I don't care who's doing it. It's painful. It's an hour of people sitting up, standing down, and clapping. And alleged, like, yeah, and it's gotten crazier as time has gone on, obviously. Like the whole, like, we're gonna start heckling and doing those kind of things. That's kind of impressive in the worst way. But that idea, like, chief legislature comes in there. State of the Union, they set they kind of set the guideline, like what we're going to do this year. This is what we need to be concerned about every year with the State of the Union. So that's chief legislator. From there, you have commander in chief. Commander in chief basically has to do a lot with when you're dealing with the military. And so those are kind of the big ones. There are others. There's like head of state. You do like fun stuff, like baby pope. Like that's the one I always think back to, is like Obama on Halloween, and there's a baby pope who wins the one of the Halloween like awards or something like that. Chief of party is another one that comes up. Chief of party is when the president goes out and campaigns for other Democrats or Republicans. That's an important one as well. I think that's one that's identified by your book. I'm probably missing some now that I'm just rambling off the top of my head, but hopefully that helps a little bit. But yeah, big ones: chief executive, commander in chief, chief legislator. Those are really big. Chief diplomat obviously is pretty important. And then chief of party also is one that your book brings up and it sort of talks about a bit. So
perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can we review like the powers of the legislative, like the House and the Senate?
Sure. And what context, Jolyn? Do you want to like talk about like what they can do, what they can't do? Do you want to talk about like what they have to be in order to be in office? Like which side of it?
Like the differences between the houses.
Okay, sweet. I can do that. There we go. There's a really good, now that I'm finally doing timestamps at the end. Good Lord, would have been. So the idea of like what the differences between the houses are. So first and foremost, it's how they're structured, right? We have a bicameral Congress. That bicameral Congress, the whole idea behind it was to ensure that we have every part, right? You remember the Great Compromise. We're going to take the big plan and the big state plan and the small state plan and make them kiss and then create Congress. And so that's what happens. And so now we have the House of Representatives. The idea of which was to create a legislative body that would be more in tune with the needs of the people, right? And so when you're talking about the House of Representatives, you're dealing with I guess we have some ambulances going by our houses, Catherine.
Yay, it's really fun.
Oh, it's so great. So the idea being that like the House of Representatives, that's why tax bills start in the House of Representatives, because you want people to be able, where do people always yes, now we have gotten into an age where people complain about everything, but you'd always hear people talk about the gas prices. Why do people care about gas prices at the end of the day?
Because they like their money.
They like their money and they see the damn gas prices every single day. And it reminds them, and they're like, oh, this person in power has control over that. And so the House of Representatives was created to sort of to think as a connection, right, between the House of Representatives and the people. In addition, The House of Representatives, you have to be you could be a little younger, you could be a little less qualified to be a member of the House, right? It's like 25 years old. You don't need to live in the state quite as long. There are a number of things that the House can kind of do, but also it is an important part because, you know, it's in their sort of rulings, right? If all tax bills start, if all revenue bills start in the House of Representatives, that matters. They're also the people who start the whole impeachment process, right? And so the process there being that, like, they're the ones who kind of go through and move to have a president impeached. And so that then when you get to the Senate, you have to be older, you have to be more responsible. The idea is that these people are more qualified for the position of leadership. And so that's why there's only 100 of them. That's why there's equal representation. And so in that sense, you have, like, yes, they then get the bills, like any revenue bill then goes to the Senate, right? Because they also have to pass a similar bill, if not, you know, a compromise bill, you know, but that's why the Senate gets these additional powers. That's why Senate gets the idea of, like, filibuster. That's why Senate gets to cloture. That's why Senate approves Supreme Court justices and ambassadors and treaties. And why they're the ones who decide whether or not a president gets removed from office, right? Like, those are the processes that the Senate gets, because they're the ones who are sort of seen as the more powerful, the more responsible of the two houses of Congress. Does that answer questions?
Yes.
Okay. So we got about 5 minutes left. I'm willing to take at least 1 to 2 more if anybody has any. Are we good?
Okay.
Oh no, we have more
Wait.
questions.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
No, you're good. Okay, so like I get the principle of the iron triangle, but I feel like I need like a quick review and an example would be helpful.
Sick. Okay, let's do this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna pull up a picture, that way you see it. I want to share my screen with you guys, so give me a momento. But let me find it first. I want a very specific picture. Let's see if it's, I think it is in my PowerPoint. So let me scroll there. There it is. Okay. Nope. Yes. Bam. Share. Okay, so you can see what I can see right now, right?
Yeah.
Sick. So the iron triangle, and this is the easiest way to think about it, right? So it basically is a mutually beneficial relationship between these 3 bodies. So you have Congress, the bureaucracy, and interest groups. So first and foremost, you guys remember what interest groups are.
Yes.
Yes.
Give me a little more than yes. Like, what are they?
They are groups formed to like support like issues or policies or just like groups formed to support issues, I think.
Good.
And
Yeah,
try to
yeah,
get like legislation around those issues.
Absolutely. So good work. And so that's your first group. And so let's just say this is the AARP, right? The you guys know who the AARP are. They're the advanced age, I think advanced age retirement program. I don't remember, something along those lines, right? So they basically take care of old folks or like people who are getting towards retirement age. Let's say that. I am soon to start receiving my AARP pamphlets. So you start there, right? And so then obviously we have Congress, that makes sense. The bureaucracy, that makes sense. So first and foremost, it's this idea that these are two-way streets, right? There's connections between each side. So in these relationships, right, the interest groups provides money to Congress. We did that with like the opensecrets.org website. Congress then provides all of the funding and political support the bureaucracy needs to carry out the law that they pass because they're in office. And then the bureaucracy may not or may create when they're doing like they're filling in the blanks and stuff along those lines, right? They may create low regulation or like policies that would favor that specific group. The interest groups make sure to support, through lobbying or through lobbyists, they'll make sure to support Congress people who are going to support the bureaucracy, right? And so there's that piece back. And then the bureaucracy makes sure that they handle the policy choices and execution well, so that Congress doesn't look bad. And then Congress provides friendly legislation and oversight to the interest groups. So when they when they put a law into play, they'll put a law into play that would be like friendly to the to whatever interest group is. So this can be like really good or really bad. So you could think of it like, oh, like if you did this with like let's say like the AARP, right? So the AARP, these are people who are, probably dealing with, I think, like health and human services primarily. So we would say the bureaucracy would be health and human services. The interest group would be the AARP. Congress is Congress, right? So the interest group, maybe they put the AARP puts up money to a couple of candidates who are running on like for older constituencies, and those older constituencies are really concerned about retirement. That maybe they're concerned about Medicare, Medicaid, or Medicare. So that's what they're concerned about. And so the bureaucracy in handling Medicare would be more careful to ensure that funding and policies are slightly easier for, maybe they simplify some paperwork, maybe they change some age stuff around or make some parts of it more beneficial. And so by doing that, the interest group receives what their members want, which is, relaxed policies for retirement. Congress receives what they want, which is basically money to run again. And then the bureaucracy is able to continue doing their job effectively because they're receiving support from the interest group through lobbying and through Congress through providing legislation which they can act on. And that's actually actionable. And that's sort of the life cycle of the iron triangle. Additional triangle questions?
Not from me. That was helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What's like one just like really concise, like negative and positive, like overall thing about like the iron triangle, like something that's just like an argument like against and an argument for, just like a general one?
I mean, number one, the easiest argument against would be like corruption, right? Like, oh, your big banks put a bunch of money up for like lobbying to relax policies on taxation systems or something like that, right? And then the bureaucracy enforces these. And so like super wealthy, the people who are always blamed for everything, like they're just getting away with it because the interest group, whatever interest group it happens to be, forked over a ton of money. And then we see these policies put in that like, whatever. I think like let's say, I'm trying to think of like what's the most dastardly thing could be. So like corruption is like, if you want succinct, corruption. If you want something slightly less succinct, it would be like, think about like big oil putting up a bunch of money for a member of Congress to get elected, and then the bureaucracy basically okaying to dig on this incredibly sacred site, but it's part of public lands. And then like a positive would be, well, if like, let's say it is like something for people of a retirement age. Well, I mean, that's probably a benefit to society, because if old people aren't taken care of by the government and they don't have any money themselves, we have a couple of options, right? Either your churches, your communities take care of the older folks, your families take care of the older folks, or old people are now homeless and starving in the streets. Right. So if the AARP, which is an interest group that supports old folks, is sort of helping, it can produce results which we as a society can benefit from.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Nobody wants to see Pop starving in the street. We know that.
Did you really have to use what I used to call my grandfather? That just, oh.
Is it Pop? Did you really used to call him Pop? That's
I
crazy.
used to call him Pop. He was my pop.
Oh, the 7 didn't go in there, but that's okay. I will take, yeah, any additional questions? Or do you guys feel super prepared?
So prepared.
The
Wait,
most
okay.
prepared.
This might be a really, really stupid question.
No
but
stupid questions.
What what is draining the swamp? I still have no clue, and I feel like I should know at this point, but I just don't.
Oh, that's more of a current event question, but basically you are taking, so the idea of like draining the swamp is taking career politicians out of Washington and replacing them with people who they believe are competent. There's something to be said for that. Like I would much rather, I think, and most of you would much rather probably have somebody who truly understands, Facebook, Instagram, like social media and like our current state of technological affairs. Like we would much prefer somebody creating policy around that who understands it rather than somebody who's like, yeah, but how do I make sure my granddaughter's Finsta isn't just taking her information? Is like their most important question to that whole thing. Like, and so draining the swamp was something that like Trump kind of ran on. But the idea just basically being for him, like we're going to move career politicians from these places and put people in office who are not necessarily career politicians.
Okay, because I use that as like evidence for like a pro or a con of pork barrel legislation, and I was confused as to why. But anyways, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, there's one thing I didn't talk about that I probably should. The bully pulpit. We didn't mention this much, but the bully pulpit at 7:04. So I'll put that down. 7:04, bully pulpit. Hey, man. It's basically just the president using their, media, whether that's through speeches or through Twitter or through whatever form of media they want to use, but to advocate, to like reach over Congress and advocate for something to the people directly. That's the bully pulpit. And that's a vocab term I never really talked about to you guys, but it's one that could come up. And I don't know why it just like for some reason I was going through some review material and it came up for me. So I just wanted to make sure I double covered it. I don't think it's going to be significant or anything, but something I didn't cover that for some reason was like stuck in my teeth, proverbially. Any final questions?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay. Awesome. I hope this was helpful for you guys. And we'll make sure to run one back for Unit 5 test. And then again, we'll be doing a bunch of these once we get closer to the exam.
Coolio. Thank you.
You're very welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night. I'll catch you
Thank
guys
you.
on Tuesday. If you have any questions, just email me.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
All right.
you, Woodman.
You're very welcome.
See you tomorrow morning.
Tuesday.
Lifting.
Lifting's canceled tomorrow.
No.
I'm
It
not
is?
there.
You're not there?
I forgot
it all
about this.
No lifting.
I forgot about this.
I
This
will
is a travesty.
double post.
Okay.
A travesty.
It's understandable.
Ugh.
Maybe we replace with like Wednesday morning or something like that.
I'll consider it.
You guys can make the decision. I mean, I'm cool with not coming in Wednesday morning if you guys don't want to, but
Okay.
Fine.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
all right.
Fine. See you Tuesday.
Later,
Okay.
dudes. See you Tuesday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.